What's cooking, folks? Vermillion Phoenix here, and today I'm here to talk to you about the Spitfire wall and my preferred parts. So the Spitfire wall, if you just look at the base stats here for a quick second, is probably one of the most interesting wall traps in the game. It does fire damage, so its damage overall is relatively flat. If it hits an enemy, there's not much it's going to be able to do to increase its damage further than its base duration of just burning and dealing damage. If it happens to hit the same enemy twice, it'll just refresh the burning duration. So you're not going to see a huge spike in difference of damage dealt to enemies. The only caveat to that is it will often miss short enemies because it fires using those little darts. That said, it seems to be able to light multiple enemies on fire, especially large ones at once, which is something that you don't see as consistently with the actual arrow wall, and because of that, I tend to like it quite a bit. You'll see me use it on quite a few stages, and the burning damage that it adds to an enemy makes a significant difference when dealing with soldiers or barbarians, the ice variant of the soldiers that you'll fight in places like Frostbite Fortress. But when it comes to parts, there's a few things that I generally like to do with these. First, I have a charging spring in it. I usually will put a double spring in, but for the most part, I've just been using charging for now because I have had the doubles in traps that I use even more consistently, such as the Floor Scorcher, which I almost always have a double spring in, and the Swinging Mace, which whenever it has a place on a map, like it's guaranteed to go in a loadout. But the Swinging Mace has a few other caveats with it. I don't think I've done a preferred parts on that yet, but that's probably the next one that I should talk about, just because that's a significantly powerful trap that I think may be underused in a lot of situations. But yeah, because of the specific uniqueness to the way that fire damage works, I don't really recommend needing more than a double spring in a Spitfire wall, just because it fires almost fast enough to make sure that any enemy that is within its range when its burn duration is gone out, even with just a charging spring, should basically just be having its fire damage renewed. And that actually is one of the nicest things about the Spitfire wall. Just its fire duration is very close to its refire rate. So it's just going to be firing really often. It fires even more often than the arrow wall itself. And then the debilitation resonator, because I happen to be playing with a lot of physical heroes at the time, and you can really change this to be whatever you want. But for fire traps, if you do want to just maximize the damage that they deal, you can use a fire resonator, and the first tick of the fire damage will not deal extra damage, but any additional burns after the fact should basically increase its damage. And if an enemy is set on fire more than once due to it firing multiple times, that should actually make sure that it gets that 30% damage boost as well. So fire resonators in fire traps are obviously super effective, but you can also use a controlled resonator and pair that with like any tar traps or any crowd control abilities your heroes may be having, whatever your favorite hero is or hero that you tend to be using a lot at the time, and it will get you a similar damage boost. But if you're short on controlled resonators, there's almost no reason not to just toss a fire resonator inside the fire trap, since you know the burns are going to be happening, and that works out pretty well. Now, as far as the triggers, there are not many triggers that actually matter for this trap. You rarely want triggers that don't, you rarely want triggers that don't cause it to fire as often, even if they were to increase the trap's damage, because the main draw for me of the Spitfire is just how rapidly it will fire and deal with enemies. Things like the kinetic reclaimer don't really make sense because firing faster doesn't really increase fire damage. So I wouldn't even use a kinetic reclaimer or even a heat activated trigger in this trap because you're not really going to benefit it. And because of that, I tend to just leave a combo generator in there. Anything else really just feels like a waste, either degrading the overall usefulness of the trap or making the trap itself just not as good, or actually adding almost no value, whereas that part could be extremely valuable in something else. Like I'd rather put a kinetic reclaimer or a heat activated trigger in even floor spikes before I would put it in the Spitfire wall, and that's just because of the way that burn mechanics work. So that's that. But overall, I think the base mechanics of the Spitfire wall are what make it valuable, and even just having a spring in there is super useful. So from there, you just want to tweak the damage a bit, and then if you can add some combo points to it via the combo generator, that's excellent too. But that's really about the only trigger that I would ever put in there. By the way, let me know what you guys think of the Spitfire wall. Do you think there are better wall traps than it for everyday use? Do you think it's overrated? I don't know. I tend to use it a lot, again, versus enemies that have the ability to limit your damage, such as soldiers and barbarians, the ice elemental soldiers, just because it helps to eat through their steady ability. But other than that, it really just synergizes well with the fact that I use Floor Scorcher so much. So maybe that's just a little bit of bias on my part. But let me know what you guys think. As always, feel free to drop any observations in the comment section below. And as always, I'll respond to them when I have the opportunity or if I see something interesting. But thanks for tuning in. I sincerely appreciate it. And until next time, as always, have a good one, folks.